Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and I'll be your guide in this journey from consciousness to cluelessness and back around again. Today on the podcast, I am going to be chatting with you about mental health and nutrition. This month on the podcast, we are diving into some different specifics of nutrition with guests, and for this first solo episode, I thought I would dive into nutrition and mental health a little bit more to follow up from last week's episode, part 2 with Adam Sud. You should definitely go listen to that. He drops some truth bombs in that episode that are so helpful and inspired this episode here today. Here we go. This podcast is supported by Will's Vegan Store. Will's Vegan Store has been a vegan company at the front of vegan clothing and sustainable fashion since they launched in 2013 by their founder, Will Green. They produce the most beautiful, vegan, sustainably made shoes, clothing, and accessories. I have been obsessed with this brand for years now. They were one of the first vegan brands that I really made the switch to. It can be hard to thrift shoes, but I love knowing that if I'm going to purchase a pair of shoes from Will's Vegan Store, they are going to be ethically made, their workers are protected, they don't use plastic packaging, they're delivered in an environmentally friendly way. It's truly the most amazing company to support. So if you're ready to try them yourself, hit the link in the show notes so they know that I sent you. Okay, so let's talk about nutrition and our brains and our moods, and how the two go hand in hand. There's a reason the phrase, "you are what you eat," has been around since the beginning of time. Well, because it's true. We literally are what we eat, meaning we take the nutritional value in the foods that we consume and make it into helping our bodies work, grow, function, all of that. So it makes sense that that would affect our mental health. I've talked a lot about mental health on this podcast. As I mentioned in the intro, there was a lot of talk about mental health and addiction, suicide ideation in the last episode with Adam Sud, episode 129. Go check it out. And if you are someone like me who maybe is interested in this kind of stuff, you know, of course, that we are what we eat, right? That's why it's that old saying. We know that, but I wanted to find out, what does that mean exactly? Just a little bit more, like just the basics of what is going on with that connection between our brain, our mental health, and the food we consume. So, of course, y'all know that I would recommend, hands down, 10 out of 10 times, a plant-based diet for a whole host of reasons. Your health, the environment, saving lives, the list goes on and on. There was a study a few years ago. I'm not even going to cite it because it's trash, but there was a study done a few years ago that everyone started freaking out about for a while because it mentioned that a vegan diet or a plant-based diet could link to depression and anxiety. So I want to talk a little bit about why that isn't true, and that'll lead us into what is actually going on. So first of all, the reason I called that study trash is because there are so many other factors that go into our mental health, right? Food is but one very important factor, of course. But there were a lot of things done in that study, like what factors were leading up to them becoming depressed, and by them, I mean the participants, depressed or anxious, what else was going on, and where was their vegan or plant-based diet failing. And that is the thing I want to highlight. Just like no matter what you eat, no matter what is the diet plan you follow, there is always a way to be less healthy or less nutritionally sound on said diet. So I can be vegan and I can eat nothing but junk food and processed food because it's 2022. So you could be vegan, be plant-based, and be eating pretty much the equivalent to processed food that is animal-based without the animal product, but it's still not good for you. Do I eat processed vegan food? Of course. That's not the mainstay of my diet, but if I ate nothing but ice cream and chips and processed maybe meats and cheeses, I would feel shitty. I wouldn't feel good. Just because I was eating plants wouldn't mean that it was the ideal diet. So I think we have to be careful. We have to look at what people are actually eating and not what we're calling a diet, because there are so many nuances to the nutritional value of different foods that if you just say, yeah, that vegan person is depressed and that's because of their diet, let's look at what they're eating. Similarly, any diet can have nutritional deficiencies. You can be eating a vegan diet, and again, if it's really processed, you're going to be low on vitamins B12 and maybe zinc, maybe iodine, and that can also be true and is also very common in animal eaters. So there is a general trend of people being low on B12 and a few of these other nutrients. There's a whole reason why our food has shifted, our lives have shifted. But it is important to make sure you are either really loading up your diet with things that can give you these nutrients that we need for brain function and mental health, or taking some sort of supplement. So that is a good reminder as well, that if you change your diet and aren't making sure that all of the food groups you were hitting before aren't hit with this new way of eating, there's going to be some distress in your body, in your mental health, maybe in your physical health. So what that comes down to is a very long way of saying, no matter what you're eating, you have to make sure you are getting a rounded out diet with all of your key nutrients to ensure that you stay healthy and happy. So let's talk a little bit about what are the things that actually help our mental health when eating plants, and why is a vegan diet, a plant-based diet, actually really, really optimal for mental health and depression or anxiety. This is not a silver bullet. I am not promoting you become vegan and your depression will be gone overnight. I am vegan and still deal with depression and anxiety, but I know my diet helps and supports me in that, and along with other tools that I have in my toolbox. So one of the key nutrients we can talk about when talking about making sure to take care of our mental health is omega-3s, fatty acids. Common nutrition advice when dealing with depression is to increase the consumption of omega-3 fatty acids. Unfortunately, that's often shown to people through eating more fatty fish. What omega-3 fatty acids help with are the anti-inflammatory effects, and that's really important for a lot of different reasons in our body to keep inflammation down, and that helps with our overall functioning. There was a study done that was presented at the American Public Health Association's annual conference that showed a trial between having vegan-vegetarian group increase omega-3s with a supplement and a fish-eating group that was told to increase their consumption of fish with omega-3s. So, the outcome was that the vegetarian-vegan diet increasing their omega-3 actually showed improvement in the participants' mood, while the people eating more fatty fish for omega-3s showed no change in their mood. So that is one thing that is really great about a plant-based diet, is that you get omega-3s from a bunch of beautiful, lovely plant-based foods that aren't animals causing harm to your body in other ways. Speaking of inflammation, it's important because inflammation is absolutely linked to what we eat, but it's also linked to depression, as I said. there have been studies that shown people who are depressed have raised inflammatory markers. So there are a lot of conditions that come with that, and one of them is depression and mental health issues. So because of a plant-based diet, not only because of omega-3s, but all the other inflammation-reducing nutrients, you can help to alleviate some of that depression and anxiety. When I started doing research for this episode, I didn't realize how much I would be focusing on inflammation and how much of a difference making sure to eat anti-inflammatory foods really affects your mental health. And again, I knew that to be true. But when you really go back and look at all the reasons why, it's quite fascinating. So another example of why a plant-based diet is the best option for your mental health, or on the animal-based product is harming you, fatty foods reduce blood flow. So saturated fats actually increase the viscosity of your blood. So when you go into that like food coma, it's actually because your body is slowing down. Your blood flow is slowing down because the oxygenation of your tissues is being reduced. So fatty foods, animal products, and or processed food can have a huge effect on the actual flow of our blood. And obviously that 110% affects the brain. Speaking of fatty foods, saturated fats and trans fats specifically really spike inflammation. I'm going to share a helpful quote from an article on forksoverknives.com. Quote, essentially the top 5 sources of saturated fat in the United States are cheese, desserts like cake and ice cream, chicken, pork, and burgers. Thanks to the ban on artificial trans fats, the only remaining trans fats in the food supply are the small amounts found in meat and dairy, and those created in the refining of vegetable oils. So some of the things that are naturally in animal products are harming our mental health by keeping our bodies inflamed and trying to constantly fight off a bacteria or virus that's being introduced into our system from these products. So that was like the Cliff Notes version of nutrition and mental health, specifically plant-based nutrition and mental health. Like, we just skimmed the surface, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into what's going on and why that stuff actually matters. Now, if you want more of the details, again, I really encourage you to go back and listen to both episodes with Adam Sud, because he dives into these things, but I wanted to give this general overview. A quote from another one of the studies I used to research for this episode says, quote, a high-quality plant-based diet may be protective against depressive symptoms in vegans and vegetarians. So there's actually not only research coming out that shows the positive effects of a plant-based diet on our mental health, the negative effects of an animal-based diet on our mental health, but also that a high-quality plant-based diet could be protective against depressive systems when doing it right. Finally, I wanted to share this article that I found because it was so helpful in case some of you listening are like, okay, I want to take charge of my mental health in a different way, and I'm going to do that through food. Where do I start? This article, The 5 P's to Improve Mental Health on a Plant-Based Diet, I thought was so helpful. Number 1, they named process. You have to know that you're going to be embracing a process of learning a new way of eating. You can start small, you can start wherever you're at, but know that it's a process and not an overnight thing, which is, as listeners know by now, kind of my detriment in life. So do as I say, not as I did on that one, and it doesn't have to be overnight. The next P they suggested thinking about is planning. So remember that being plant-based in a non-plant-based world sometimes mean you have to plan ahead, whether it's the work event that you have to make sure you can eat dinner at, checking a restaurant, whatever it is, being more prepared will help you transition to being more plant-based and make it feel less stressful. Next is patient. If you are making this change, first of all, know that it's really freaking amazing that you're taking your health and, in this context, mental health into your own hands. And I really love that you're doing that, but please be patient with yourself. You are literally rewiring your brain after, depending on how old you are, decades of negative habits. It's okay if that takes some time. The next one is purpose, and this is something I talk about a lot. Finding the reason you're doing this, not just, oh, I know I should eat more plants, so I'm going to do it. Make it a goal and make it really tangible. Like, I want to see improvements in my mental health. That's why I'm doing this, because I know whatever your purpose is, you have to keep coming back to that. When it gets hard, when it gets tricky, when it gets annoying, having a purpose really defined helps you stick with it and keep trying. And finally, passing it on, which it's really corny, but I have to because it's so true. If this was helpful to you and you are starting to adopt these changes and you notice improvements, pass it on. Share with someone else who could benefit. If you are going plant-based and you're struggling and it's making things harder, definitely do what you need to do for your mental health in that moment, and then get help, get assistance to be there, whether it's me as your coach or somebody else. What matters to me is that you are getting to where you want to be with your plant-based journey, whether it's for your mental health, your physical health, or any other reason. Thanks for listening to another episode of Consciously Clueless. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. If that's somewhere like Apple Podcasts, leave a review and you could be read on air as the review of the week. Looking for more podcast content, yoga videos, meditations, and all-around amazing community? Head over to patreon.com/consciouslycarly and check out what's going on. And finally, if you are ready to make changes in your life but don't really know where to begin, let's work together. Head over to consciouslycarly.com and we can start the process and get you happy. Until next time.